Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Minecraft Disney's Q&A. We're going to pick up where I left off last week here at the Disney's Hollywood Studios, and I have a couple of questions to answer this week. A bunch of good ones, actually. So let's just dive in and get started. So, first up, we have Wekar, who asked, do you think a park like Tokyo DisneySea could work in Disney World? So, if you're unaware, there is a Disney in Tokyo called Tokyo DisneySea. From my recollection, when it was built, it was not owned outright by the Disney company. It was more like it was licensed out to another company in Japan, and then Disney consulted on it heavily. Today, it is like Disney World Paris, and I would say Hong Kong Disney, in the sense that they're sort of amalgams of the Disneys here in the United States. So for that reason alone, I don't know if it would work. If you were talking about like taking the park and putting it here in Disney World, I don't know if it would work because there'd just be a lot of overlap. For instance, that they have their own Tower of Terror and Toy Story Mania, things like that. But thematically, would it work? I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't. I've never been there myself, but if you've ever looked it up, it's got very highly detailed theming. They have different areas made to look like different regions, like the canals of Venice and things like that. I think it'd be pretty cool. I don't know what like the central theme of the park would be here, because there, the idea is it's Disney in Tokyo, just the same way the Hong Kong Disney is Disney in Hong Kong. Here, there's already the Magic Kingdom, so it wouldn't just be like Disney in Florida, because we've got that already. So like, what would the central theme be? And that I'm not too sure. I guess like areas of the world, but how does that tie into World Showcase? I don't know. In any case, looking at the detail that's put into that park, I mean, I would have loved to see some of those areas here in the States, but I guess now I have reason to go over there and check it out. So thank you for that question. So I guess the short answer is yes and no, and the long answer is yes and no. Zach Nunn asks, I'm only a kid, but why are food prices in Disney so high instead of the average prices at like your local fast food restaurant? Simple answer, because they know you're either eating with them or not at all in most cases. I mean, you have to look at it this way. Disney understands that if I was right here in real life, here in the back of Disney's Hollywood studio, and I wanted something for lunch, my options are to go eat somewhere Disney owned, or to walk my way all the way out of the park, get in my car, drive off property, and find a non-Disney owned, operated, or partnered with eatery and then eat there and then drive all the way back. And they understand that almost nobody's going to do that. So in a sense, they sort of know they could charge a little bit more. That said, to be 100% honest, I mean, it depends on where you're coming from as well. I'm a native New Yorker. I'm here in New York City, and the first time I went as an adult, where I was sort of in charge of my eating budget, I was prepared for like highly overpriced meals, and then I found out that like lunch at Disney World isn't too far off from like lunch in Manhattan. It's so like it like depends on where you're coming from and what you're used to. But yeah, I think a big part of it is that they know that they can charge a little extra. It's sort of that Disney price that they throw around. Now, that said, it leads into the next question really well, which is from Bafigz, Bafigz 06, who asks, are the prices for products in Disney overpriced? And I think it's very interesting that he asks it with that wording. And I don't know if that was intentional, but he asks, are they overpriced? Now, if you asked me, are they highly priced? I would say yes, they are probably highly priced. Most things that you get here at Disney cost much more than they would anywhere else. Are they overpriced, however? I don't know. That's something that's always going to be subjective to each person and the budget you're going with. Personally, I've gone to, my last vacation was to Disney World. I went with a bunch of friends. We went as recent college graduates, so like we weren't in that whole like super thrifty college mode anymore, but at the same time, we're still young adults who are just, low level in the working industry. That said, I have friends who have gone to Europe, and when you compare the cost of flying to Disney for a week to like going on a European vacation, it's a lot cheaper mainly because of the flight, but just overall, I think a lot of the things are cheaper. So it depends on what you're comparing it to. Personally, the value I get out of a Disney vacation makes me feel like it is still a great price and a great value. And, a lot of people complain because every year they do raise the ticket prices a little bit. But I haven't felt that I've run into I haven't run into a number that makes it not worth going for me. I still get immense value out of these trips. So personally, I don't think it's overpriced. I do think it's highly priced, though. And it is the reason why I don't go like every year or multiple times a year. I mean, also think about people from Florida. Like, is it overpriced for them when, the economies of scale allow them to go on multiple trips a year and, save a lot of money? It's going to be different for everybody, basically. Next up, we have the Champ 4427, who asked, do you think Disney will ever expand to other areas in the United States, like the Northeast or the Midwest, or do you feel that they will just stay at the two locations? The short answer to that is I think they will stay at the two locations. I don't think you're going to see a Disney in any of those regions you mentioned. I think there was a possibility of it maybe 30 or 40 years ago, but I think it's gone today. And I think part of the reason for that is because travel has become so efficient. The fact is, as somebody who's in the Northeast, I could grab a $90 flight ticket down to Orlando, and there I am in Orlando. So, there isn't as high of a demand for them to put in the cost of building an entirely new park. Not to mention the regions you're mentioning, specifically the Northeast and the Midwest, you wouldn't be able to have those open year round. So the profits on a park in those regions just isn't going to be nearly as high. Now, what's interesting is there were plans at times to go to those different areas. For instance, during the Eisner years, when they were working on Euro Disney and all the other Disneys, Michael Eisner had started plans on a theme park outside of Washington, D.C. called Disney's America. And it was going to be a Disney all about America and the 13 colonies and, the founding of the nation and things like that. It ended up falling apart because there was a lot of backlash from the historical community, from people in the region who just thought Disneyfying something as important and as grave as the foundation of this country would have been a tasteless idea. There was also the fact that they were going to be building it in an area that used to be I believe it was a Revolutionary War or a Civil War battlefield, and so there was a lot of backlash against the idea of taking something that's supposed to be sacred and turning it into a theme park. And ultimately, there was also the financial aspects of the fact that Euro Disney at the time just wasn't performing as well as it should have been doing. So for all those reasons, eventually Michael Eisner backed out and decided not to make it. And before that, when Walt... Let's hop on this ride. Oh, we gotta wait for the light. Oh, there he goes. Before that, when Walt was planning Disney World, he was looking for a whole bunch of different locations to put it. And one of the areas he considered was in a completely enclosed Disneyland, an indoors Disneyland in St. Louis, which would have been interesting. Eventually, the part that fell through was... I shouldn't say the part that fell through. It was one of the things that led up to him deciding against it was the fact that he was opposed to having any sort of alcohol in the park, and the city was not thrilled with that idea. There was just a disagreement there, and I wouldn't say that was like the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. But I would say it added to the list. But then eventually he settled on Florida because on top of that, you could have it open 24/7. and there was just so much cheap land. That was the other thing. Putting it in an established city like that would have made land extremely expensive to come by. And after Disneyland, Walt really wanted a lot of breathing room because he didn't want the obvious developments that would follow him to sort of ugly up the area, so to speak. So, I mean, to sum it up, I don't think you'll see another Disney in America in another region. I think you'll just see them. I mean, you have to understand Disney World, there's still so much land they own that is undeveloped that they could probably put another 3 or 4 theme parks in there and still feel comfortable and not crowded. So I think they'll do that before they buy a bunch of land, especially because today you can't do what Walt did and pick up all this land secretly and cheaply. So any sort of parks they build outside of California and Florida are going to be super expensive. Another related question, Cameras and Legos asks, hey Rob, I was wondering, here, let's go there for this question. Do you ever see Epcot expanding in the future? Yes, I could see it happening. You have to remember, the World Showcase was designed and established with many more countries in mind. And if you've ever gone around World Showcase, you'll see there are a lot of areas of just sort of nothing in between countries. And those were where there were going to be pavilions, but eventually it fell through. So there's a lot of room to add additional countries to World Showcase. Now, that said, I don't think you're going to see much of an expansion in Future World. I think the reason for that is, if you look at the Magic Kingdom, the way they set up the Magic Kingdom was they built a tunnel system on the ground layer and then built the park above it so you could get around underground. Now, what Epcot did instead was they just have basically a road that goes around the park that cast members use to go around. And so they too can get around without being seen. But that sort of, I think, sets a perimeter of the park that I don't think you're going to see expand much. I think you'll see World Showcase expand just because the empty space is already there. It's just a matter of developing it. Whereas like in Future World, I think the space is pretty much set. So I think you could see some expansion if they ever decide to tear down the Wonders of Life Pavilion and put something there. You could probably see something there. I think that's what you'll see more than anything. You'll see them take things out and put new things. I mean, look, Horizons, they didn't just throw Mission Space or Test Track into Epcot alongside World of Motion and Horizons. You get rid of the old and you bring in the new. And I think part of the reason for that is the cost of utilities, because, you know, one aspect of building these parks that a lot of people don't consider is utilities. The fact that you need to run water and power and, you know, air conditioning through all of these places. And that's why it's most important to get that down first. So the idea of expanding requires laying down more utilities and rerouting them. And as a result, I think you'll see less cases of them building new areas and more cases of them revising areas that already exist. Now, I say that, of course, even with New Fantasyland being built, I think there are obviously going to be exceptions, but I think Epcot is probably towards the bottom of the list of revisions, so I don't think you're going to see an expansion in that sense. But I would love to see more World Showcase countries. It's just a matter of finding companies from those countries willing to sponsor it. In fact, let's head over to the World Showcase. Let's see. Matt Rappa says, in discussion of a fifth gate, what are your thoughts on it relating to all Pixar? I know Disney Hollywood Studios has Pixar Place, but it's relatively small in nature. Cars Land could be installed in this fifth gate as well. As Pixar continues to grow, so will new ideas. I don't know how I feel about that. That's a great question. I don't know if... I think, obviously, more Pixar-related attractions is a great idea. I'm all for that. I don't know about the idea of a park being focused on it, and I don't know if Disney would be up for that as well. I think, for one thing, from a marketing standpoint, the problem with an all Pixar-related park is that if you have people coming to Disney who aren't particularly Pixar fans, they have no incentive to go to this park. Which I know it might seem hard to imagine, like somebody who just outright doesn't like anything Pixar, but I'm sure those people exist, and I think part of the reason you mix things up, you have a Finding Nemo here in Epcot, and then you have a Toy Story Midway Mania and the Hollywood Studios, and maybe they'll add something to the Magic Kingdom eventually, is so that you have that incentive to go to these different areas. And personally, I don't like the idea of a park that is just so singularly themed, just because I think variety is what makes this place so special. Imagine a Magic Kingdom that was just Fantasyland related attractions. I don't know how much that would be great. I think part of the appeal of the Magic Kingdom is that you could go, over into the next area and you get a whole different experience. And I think that should not only relate to themes, but it should relate to the IPs that Disney is working with, Now, if they did a fifth gate that focused on all of these new properties that they've acquired, like Marvel and Star Wars and Pixar, then you've got much more of a eclectic mix that people might be more inclined to visit, and it gives them a fresh new bin of things to work with that they haven't necessarily fleshed out yet. And I think that would be pretty cool. Although I think there'd be some question at that point of how Disney would it feel. Because yes, Disney owns Marvel now, they own Star Wars now, and they own Pixar. But like, how much do we associate these things with Disney? I mean, Star Wars especially, that's something that it is a Disney property now, but do we really think of it as a Disney property? Because Star Wars has been established since the 70s, and it's something that so many generations have grown up with and come to know, that I think it still feels like its own thing, and I think it's going to take a long time before it feels like a Disney thing. Same thing with Marvel, right? Marvel's been around even longer than Star Wars has, and that's something that people grew up and grew old with, and to think that it's a Disney thing now is probably awkward for some people. So maybe a fifth park would help with making it feel Disney, or maybe it would set that park apart and make it feel like almost like a Universal type situation. But that's a good question. I mean, there's always discussion on what should a fifth gate be, and I'm sure the discussion is as lively within the walls of Disney than it is outside of it. Let's see. And then going on to a couple of quick ones. TJ Neon says, what's your favorite ride queue? Now, last week I talked a lot about how I think the best theming in attractions is within the queue because, in most cases, that's where you're spending most of the time. Toy Story Midway Mania is fantastic, but the ride lasts a couple of minutes. I'll be in the queue for an hour or an hour and a half on a popular day. So I think it's important to get the theming there. That said, my favorite ride, personally, is the Jungle Cruise. And it's not like an advanced queue. It doesn't have the interactive elements that Space Mountain has now, or the Haunted Mansion. The theming isn't incredibly complex. It's not like, extremely diverse and different. It's just sort of like a jungle boat dock. But the reason I love the Jungle Cruise queue is for the audio loop.
All skippers in training are required to wear a leopard hatband, so travelers at dockside will know not to board your boats.
I have many times sat there and just listened to the loop, like when I'm at work or I'm, hanging out at home, just because, one, I love that classical style of music, that, old time jazz, swing, sort of classic music. And then the puns and the writing are just so entertaining. So, that's one ride, for instance, where like I could probably, if they have Fast Pass, I could get it, but I wouldn't because I just like listening to that and hanging out and enjoying the atmosphere. So that's my favorite queue. I would love to hear other people's favorites queue and why you think it's your favorite queue. And then lastly this week, the Disney Lover 71 asked, what's your favorite Disney park audio music? Now, for obvious reasons, I'm going to not consider the Jungle Cruise queue since we just talked about that. So, there's a lot of Disney park audio tracks and loops out there. What is my favorite, though? That's a tough one. I mean, I like a lot of them. I'm a fan, to be honest. I'm a fan of the current Tomorrowland audio loop. It's got this sort of weird, retro, futuristic sound quality element to it. And what I love most about it, though, is that they work in a lot of current themes. So themes for rides and, like they have a Toy Story song in there in that style of the Tomorrowland music. but they also fit in the themes of older attractions that aren't there anymore. Like If You Had Wings, which is a very old, it predates like me. Like I've never been on If You Had Wings, at least not to my knowledge. I must have been a baby if I was. You know, it was already Delta Dream Fight at that point. But they have that theme and they work it into this cue music. Same thing with the Carousel of Progress. They took the Now Is the Time theme song, which hasn't been in use in the ride for decades now, and they I think these are supposed to be up, and they worked it in there. And it's one of those things, like, you know, a big Disney fan will probably pick up on it, but to anyone else, it's just background music. So I like those little subtle nods. So that's my favorite cue music. Fitting that we're ending here in Morocco, because my close friend is actually in the real Morocco on vacation right now. So this has been Disney World's Minecraft Disney's Q&A. If you have any questions you want me to answer regarding the history of Disney or the future of Disney or touring at Disney, or I guess even little things like favorites, feel free to ask in the comments below. Again, I can't get to everyone every week. I do my best to answer. If I don't answer here in the video, I at least try to answer it within the comments section. So feel free to ask whatever the question is. I hope you have a fantastic week. Whatever you do, and make the most of it, because it makes it that much better. And I hope to see you all here next week for the next episode of Minecraft Disney's Q&A. Bye, everyone.